ancient Greece and King Amasis and just the influence of ancient Kemet on Greece. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So I hope that you are doing well, and I want to kind of minimize some things here and go live, and I hope that you are doing well. God bless you. Hopefully you're able to join me and take a look at this. And if you get a chance, I ask you to please put your comments down below. You guys have a lot of people have a lot of great comments and a lot of great things to say. So I'll ask up front, if you like this information, or if you just have stuff you want to share, please add your voice to the comments below. Please share them. I try to read them as much as I can whenever I'm able to read them. And then also share this with somebody. Tell somebody about it, and let's talk about this, because the reason why I wanted to do this particular conversation, this particular talk, is because, I've read so much and heard so much, and we've all heard so much about ancient Greece, and we've heard a lot about the influence of ancient Kemet and ancient Egypt on Greece, but we don't really talk about how that is and why that is. And much of the information that I've read and that I've seen about ancient Greece, a lot of it doesn't even really talk about from an academic standpoint. When you learn about this in school, when you learn about these things, they don't talk about a lot what specifically were the interactions between ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. They just don't talk about ancient Kemet, and it's like it's just glossed over. But yet we're talking about a period of hundreds of years of things that took place and things that happened that we really need to kind of talk about and kind of dig into. And I've shared this before, and I'll share this here as a part of just the introduction to this. I remember being in a college class, a college humanities class, and we were talking in the college, and we were there, and I'm sitting towards the back of it. I'm typically sitting towards the back, and as a teacher was there, and it was a Caucasian teacher, fine, mostly African American students, but it was a Caucasian teacher, and she was talking. We were reading her humanities book, and I kept my humanities book. Just to let you know this, I kept my humanities book. I kept pretty much almost all of my college books. I keep them. I've kept them. And I remember her talking about, and we start talking about humanities and just things with respect to some archaeology, anthropology, and things with respect to human beings, right? And she started talking about columns and even shopping malls and just various things that we get from ancient Greece. And this was at the very beginning of the class, the very beginning of the class. And I thought to myself, wow, what is this? So I raised my hand and I asked her, and I said, and Professor, how could it be that you have a situation where, we get all these things from ancient Greece, columns, you say, and things of that nature, when there are columns in ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, that are older than Greece itself? How can we get columns from Greece if there are columns in Egypt and Kemet that are older than Greece itself? And she stopped, and she was like, she kind of froze a little bit, and was a little bit of an awkward silence there. And, a lot of the students, were all quiet. I guess they were waiting to see what she would say. And then she kind of said, well, open your books up to this particular page. She went to a page that we had skipped over, that we were not reading in class. We were reading something else. And she said, here's, you're right. There are a lot of things in ancient Egypt. And she starts talking about it. There were only like a couple paragraphs on ancient Egypt and ancient Kemet in the book. And then we went right into Greece, and they went right into Greek things and Greek. And I was like, that's the summation, if you will, of a lot of the history and things that we're taught about ancient Greece and ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet. We're taught about that. We're just basically given a gloss over. We're given Greece first, and we're not even talked about, or we're not even given information with respect to its relationship with ancient Kemet. We talk about Kemet as if it is Egypt, and as if the things that happened when the Greek people took over Egypt, many years later, that was what summed up Egypt. And we don't talk about any of that relationship mathematically or any of these things. Pythagoras studying, none of that stuff we talk about. So that's partly why I wanted to talk about this today, and why I'm kind of driving up in this, because that's something that's been my experience, and that's something that's challenged me. So when I think about that and I start to read about it, when you start to read about it, you start to read about what people are writing, they're telling you it. We just are not retelling it in nowadays. We just are not retelling it. So I want to talk a little about Herodotus and some of the things he said, and some things with respect to ancient Greeks' relationship with ancient Kemet, and to give you some things to think about. So this gentleman here is King Amasis. He is a king during the 26th dynasty of ancient Kemet. So he's the king. He's ruling from around 570 BC to about 526 BC or thereabouts, right? And he's one of the last rulers of the 26th dynasty. So the 26th dynasty, this is after King Ptahhotep, this is after Piankhy, this is after the Kushite kingdom that ruled ancient Kemet, for a period of time. This is after them. This is also during a period of time when the Assyrians had already risen to power and had conquered a lot of people. When the Assyrians attacked Jerusalem and Israel, and we'll talk about that, attacked Israel, and we'll talk about that probably in a later episode. And when King Ptahhotep is, mentioned in the Bible and comes apparently to the aid of Israel, apparently to fight the Assyrians, apparently. So we'll talk a little about that later. This is all after that time. And the Assyrians kind of rose, and eventually the Assyrians, apparently maybe King Ptahhotep met the Assyrians in battle sometime around the early 600s, if you will, BC, maybe 690 something or 699 or thereabouts, 700 BC, maybe thereabouts. And it seems they might have met in battle. And then years later, decades later, the Assyrian army comes back and they attack Memphis. And this is the time where, Taharqa is fighting the Assyrian army. He had been in control for a long period of time, but the Assyrians take over Memphis, the northern part of ancient Kemet. And then he rules for another, maybe 8 or 9 years or thereabouts. He rules for another period of time. And then eventually he passes away, and his successor is the person who ends up meeting the Assyrian army when they go all the way down the southern part of ancient Kemet and they take over Auset, or they destroy Auset. They destroy what would become Thebes, right? What would be known as Thebes. And so this is all taking place, and it's in the backdrop of this 26th dynasty. This is in the backdrop of the dynasty that King Amasis is a part of. They take over after the Kushites essentially leave ancient Kemet, after the Assyrians are, kicking a lot of people's butts, so to speak. The Assyrians are kicking a lot of people's butt around the world and in that area of the world, and they're destroying a lot of things. And Egypt was no different. Kemet was no different. And after that period of time, when the Kushites left, the 26th dynasty takes charge. And King Amasis is one of the last kings of the 26th dynasty. And they have their power rooted in the northern part of Kemet. And I wish a lot of you would kind of comment down below us, because I know there are a lot of people who know. God bless you. How you doing, Marbury? How you doing? God bless you. There are a lot of people. Hello to you too. Just saying, God bless you. Hopefully you are doing well. There are a lot of people who know a lot about this information, but it is apparent that the Assyrian army, when they were in charge for a period of time, had the 26th dynasty kind of as puppets, kind of as their tributaries, if you will, they paid tribute to them. The 26th dynasty was paying tribute to the Assyrians. The Assyrians kind of had them as their puppets a little bit, kind of in their back pocket. And so there's a lot of dynamics that's taking place before he becomes king. But the Assyrian army and the Assyrians fall. So why it is believed that they had a stronghold and influence on this northern new dynasty that was now going to be controlling ancient Kemet, they had a kind of a foothold in there. The Assyrian army was having problems. So there were things falling apart back in the area where Nineveh was, which present day Iraq, that area. Things were falling apart. And you eventually have the fall of the Assyrian army right around 612 BC or thereabouts. And all of this is kind of the backdrop, because I want to share this, because as we begin to talk about Herodotus, we're going to talk about Herodotus and what he said about King Amasis and why this might be significant. Because as you think about it, King Amasis now, when he becomes in power, and he's the second to last king of the 26th dynasty, he's coming to power during a time where the Assyrians have fallen. The 26th dynasty can kind of raise its power, but Kush is still a powerhouse. And the power that the 26th dynasty has is in the northern part of ancient Kemet. It's in the north of ancient Kemet. And you will find, as I kind of share here, and kind of pull this up so you can get a chance to see this. We'll talk about right here in the Nile Delta. As you see the Nile Delta, right there on the left-hand side of it, kind of on the west, if you will, of the Nile Delta, is where you have not only not too far from where the seat of power for the 26th dynasty was. It was in the northern part. Remember, Kush is still strong in the south. And there were a lot of people in Upper Kemet who still liked Kush, or who had an affinity toward Kush. So there were things that the 26th dynasty had to do in order to assert its power. But Kush is still a powerhouse in what is today modern Sudan and in Lower Nubia, and that place. So they are consolidating their power in the north, and King Amasis, has to do something about it. He has to kind of consolidate his power, and it's believed that the people who were part of the 26th dynasty, not just him, but even his predecessors, began to hire people as mercenaries. They hired people who were from modern day Turkey. So they were, different people then, but the people who were from modern day Turkey, Phoenicians as well as Greek people. So Greek people were hired as mercenaries, as foreign mercenaries. And you can kind of see the Mediterranean there, right in the north, the Mediterranean Sea. And you would see, the island of Crete and Greece. And you would see over, as you kind of go toward the east, you'll see what would be Phoenicia, which is present day Palestine and Israel, that type of place. And you would see present day Turkey. All those areas are areas where Egypt had a lot of influence, and where obviously the Assyrians had a lot of influence, and then the Persians would come to have a lot of influence, right? But this is all before, we get into the Greek powerhouse. Well, Egypt is still a powerhouse and is still, to be reckoned with. But they're hiring, you could begin to see that Amasis and his predecessors, they're hiring Greek mercenaries. They're hiring people not from the south, not from the southern part of Kemet, probably because the Kushite people were in power. The Kushites were still powerful, and you even still had people who were very much influential in Auset and in the temple at Karnak. So you saw that very much of an important influence, I believe, from the Kushite people, as evidenced by the fact that Shep-en-Wepet was the God's wife of Amen, and she had to transition that over to one of the kings of the 26th dynasty's daughter, if you will. So there was still a great influence, I believe, of Kush in the south, and the power structure for the 26th dynasty laid in the north. And so they drew on soldiers from other areas, not just Kemetic soldiers. They had Kemetic soldiers, but not just even farther south so much, as they also drew on people who were from Greece, as I mentioned, from Phoenicia, as well as from places in modern day Turkey. So with that being said, you start to see this shape kind of develop. You start to see this formation of where this 26th dynasty, whose power structure and capital is in the northern part of ancient Kemet, and them drawing on mercenaries from the northern part of their territory and from north of the country, you start to see things develop. And this, I want to kind of give you some perspective, because we're talking about before Socrates, we're talking about well before Alexander the Great, hundreds of years before Alexander the Great, we're talking before Plato, we're talking before all those people. This is while Egypt is still Egypt, while Kemet is still Kemet. Greece is not taking over it yet. And I want to share this with you. So this is from Herodotus. If you take a look at this, is Herodotus, and this is from his history. So this is book 2. Look for 178, 179 if you want to take a look at it. I love for people to kind of research on their own. But this is from book 2 of Herodotus. And like I said, you can look at 178, 179 from book 2. And you'll start to see, and he's talking about the reign of Amasis. And Amasis is the gentleman we're talking about here. He's talking about the reign of Amasis. And he's saying, that Kemet, was enjoying a whole lot of prosperity under Amasis. And there were significant things happening from the prosperity they were experiencing from the river, and how that was contributing to land prosperity and probably agriculture, and how that was benefiting the people under Amasis. And then he also mentioned that Amasis was he who established the law among the Egyptians, the Kemetic people, that every person in ancient Kemet should annually declare to the governor of his district by what means he maintained himself. So you essentially Amasis was said to, according to Herodotus, develop a law that said that if you were a citizen, if you were in ancient Kemet, you had to declare to the governor, the person who was the ruler of your section, of your area, if you will, how they were organized, how you made your living. And if you couldn't find a good, respectable, honest way to talk about how you made your living, how you maintained yourself, they put you to death. That's what Herodotus said. They killed you, right? And so how you doing, Hotep? How you doing? God bless you. Peace to you, Sarah, as well. God bless you. That if you couldn't do that, they put you to death. So, so if the person, he had to maintain by what means you maintain yourself. If he failed to do this, he did not show that he lived by honest means, he would be punished to death. Interesting then. Then he goes on to say that Solon, the Athenian, having brought this law from Egypt, established it in Athens. Now this is not me, right? This is Herodotus, thousands of years ago, saying that this law that was created in ancient Kemet was taken by someone to Athens and was established as a law in Greek. This is already showing you that there was an influence from Greece, from Egypt, ancient Kemet to Greece, that there was an influence there, that somebody observed something in ancient Kemet, a law that they liked, and they brought that law and they established it in Athens. We don't even talk about this. This is before Socrates. This is before Hippocrates. This is before Plato. This is before Aristotle. This particular thing is being taught. This particular law is being talked about by Herodotus in his histories, book 2. And so he's saying that Solon the Athenian, having brought this law from Egypt, established it at Athens, and that people still continue to observe it as being an unobjectionable regulation. So he's saying right there that even at the time when he was writing this book and he's observing it, that people are still observing this law that obviously took place before him, right? So he's talking about, something that was before him, maybe 100 years before him, that people are still observing in Athens, and that it came from Egypt, that it came from ancient Kemet. This is right here talking about an influence. And I want to kind of give you some perspective in terms of just like what we're talking about in terms of like time periods and things of that nature. So as I look at that, just to give you some ideas from a timeline perspective. So when I talk about mercenaries up there, you see mercenaries as being, they're there, and King Amasis and his predecessors are hiring mercenaries from Phoenicia, from what is modern day Turkey, what would become Turkey, as well as from Greece. So this is happening, well before 600 BC. This is already taking place, right? They're hiring people from the north because they kind of had to. The powerhouse in the south was really closely still aligned with Kush, and Kush was still a powerhouse. And after all, it was the Ausarians that had necessarily defeated the Kushites, if you will, in Kemet, and not the 26th dynasty, so to speak. So there's more that goes on after that, but their powerhouse is in the north. So you have mercenaries being hired by Amasis and his predecessors in the army of Kemet from the north, from out of the country, if you will. And then King Amasis, he's ruling from about 570 BC to about 526 BC, just to give you that. Now, Herodotus isn't born, we believe, until about maybe 484, 485 BC, and he dies around 425 BC. So he's writing his histories somewhere in between there, obviously, right? He wasn't writing when he was 2. So somewhere in between there. So he's talking about things that happened long before him. And this is, we're not even getting to Alexander the Great, which is, you're talking about 330 BC, 332 BC when they come into ancient Kemet. We're talking about hundreds of years. Much time passes before we get into ancient Greece taking over Kemet. We're talking about hundreds of years passing, but nobody talks about that in terms of the influence that was made. So Herodotus is there. He's like 484 to 425. Socrates is about 470. So he's coming about 100 years or so after these things, or more after this city that I'm going to talk about is taking place. He's coming after this, as well as Hippocrates and Plato and Aristotle. They're coming years after this is taking place. So let's dig more into what he's saying. So he's saying, so not only was this particular law taking place, but he also says that Amasis being partial to the Greeks, and this is important. You take notes if you get a chance, or jot it down for your reading and studying. But Amasis being partial to the Greeks, both bestowed other favors on various of the Greeks, and moreover gave the city of Naucratis. So this Naucratis here, for such as arrived in Egypt to dwell in, and as such who did not wish to dwell there, he gave them or trade by the sea. He gave them other things that they could do in terms of building temples and altars. But let's talk about this for a second. He gave the Greeks the city of Naucratis, for which, that when they arrived in Egypt for them to dwell in. Let's talk about that a little bit and kind of jump into that. What does that even mean? What are we talking about, giving the Greeks the city of Naucratis? And I want to kind of just jump up to that and I'm talking about right here, right in the Delta, not far from when the capital of the 26th dynasty is the city of Naucratis. Now you can look at this, and you can Naucratis, you may pronounce it different ways, Naucratis. So you may think about this different ways, but this particular city, and the British Museum did a whole expose on it. They did a whole field expedition and archaeological, findings and studies on this, as well as people years ago, over 100 years ago, have studied this as well, partly because of what Herodotus said. He said there's a city that there were Greeks in that were along hundreds of years, BC, 500-600 years BC at least, and that Greeks were there. And so this, and you look at that, you can find the remains of it. You can find what he's talking about. He describes it very specifically. He talks about where it is on the Nile, on the Canoptic branch of the Nile, being there in the Delta, not far from the capital city that King Amasis was in, and that he was partial to them. And the purpose of the city, the purpose of this Naucratis, the purpose of the city was really for them to be able to have a place for trade. So as we started thinking, really what they were doing was he was setting up a place where people who not only were mercenaries in the northern part of ancient Kemet, from Greece, from Turkey, from Phoenicia, but there were also merchants. And apparently this is the city of Naucratis, I'll say. Apparently this city was a city that was designated. It wasn't just Greeks living there. There were other people living there, like Phoenicians and other people. It wasn't just the Greeks living there, but that he designated it. According to Herodotus, he designated it as a place where when Greek people would come over, they could dwell there, and they could be merchants, specifically for trade. So at this point in time, you start to like 570 BC, 550 BC, you start to have Greece becoming into its own with respect to a trading partner. But Kemet is still king. Kemet is still on the rise. You have a situation where the Persians are trying to raise their head, right? So the Persians will be coming soon. So they're coming soon. But this is before the first Persian invasion of Kemet. This is before that as well. And the Assyrians are kind of off the scene now. So you still have the powerhouse of Kemet, even though there's changes in the wind. There's changes taking place because we're in the Iron Age and people are developing much more specific and powerful tools and weapons, if you will. But he's talking about that they would come to the city of Naucratis, for such as arrived into Egypt to dwell in. And such as did not wish to settle there, but only to trade by sea. He granted places that they might erect altars and temples to the gods. So he's talking about if they wanted to come dwell well that they could dwell there. And if they did not want to dwell there, they could set up various places in the area in the northern part of ancient Kemet where they could worship their deities. And he gives you a list of them. And I'll kind of show it to you right here. Of the cities from ancient Greece. So now he talks about the most spacious of one of the buildings that they erected. The people from Greece was called the Helleneum. And it was erected by a common charge of the following cities. So you have the Ionians, which were a part of a member of the Greek family, if you will. And he talks about the list of cities, Teos, the list of cities from the Ionians who helped to build this wonderful building, right? Then he talks about the Dorians and the cities that were a part of building that. And he talks about the Aeolians and the city that was a part of building that. And he talks about, so therefore they had temples and altars that they built in ancient Kemet that were sanctioned by Amasis that allowed them to be able to worship freely there. He goes on to say, so that you can see, he goes on to say, and I'll just check and see real quick. Of course, Greece was, there you go. Look at their gods and their goddesses. Yeah, if you look at their gods and goddesses, you start to see it. You can see it in the religion too, right? So you begin to see it. But a lot of us don't talk about the specifics of it. So he talks about them building a temple and building temples for Jupiter or Zeus, if you will, that they're building. And he also talks about, this is very specific and interesting here. He said, if a man arrived, if somebody was coming from ancient Greece, right? If a person arrived to another mouth of the Nile, not at the Kemetic mouth, and he was obliged to swear that he had come there against his will. So he's saying that if a person came from Greece or came as a merchant, as a trade person, and they did not come to Naucratis, that area that was designated as a merchant area, they landed somewhere else, he had to swear that he had done it against his will, that maybe he had gone off track, or that the winds had taken him off track, and that he had to take everything he had in the ship, and he had to sail back to that Kemetic mouth where this Naucratis, where this city was that we're talking, where this area is. He had to sail back to that area in order to be able to prevent himself from being killed or having problems with him. And if he was not able to sail because the winds wouldn't let him, he would have to carry his stuff literally around the delta, drag it, and go back to this city, because he was saying that's how serious they took this area of being a trade area and the area for the Greeks to be. And that's what he's mentioning here, what Herodotus is saying. And he goes on to say other things about a particular temple that was built in Delphi, and how it was damaged by fire, and they were looking for people to help give money and resources toward rebuilding this temple. And it mentions, for Amasis gave them 1,000 talents of a loom, and the Grecians who were settled in Egypt 20 if you will. He's talking about, not only was there this town Naucratis that was in the northern part of ancient Kemet, in the northern part of that area right up there, but there were also merchants and trade. And if you were coming from Greece or somewhere else and you ended up not being in that city and you were trying to trade, you were told to go back to that city, and that was your place to go. And then also, even when they had a situation where there was a terrible fire that destroyed one of their temples in Delphi, that they came seeking resources for people to help pay. And Amasis, one of the kings of Kemet at the time, gave them a lot of resources, gave them a lot of precious metals to help them rebuild their temple that was in Delphi, as well as Greek people who were settled in ancient Kemet did that. So when you stop to think for a while, this is, as I mentioned, this is long before Herodotus is born. This is happening. This is before Hippocrates. This is before Socrates. This is for Plato and Aristotle. This is a Greek settlement, and it's the first and the earliest Greek settlement in ancient Kemet. This Naucratis area is the first and the earliest Greek settlement in ancient Kemet, and this is happening for hundreds of years. So by the time we try to get to Alexander the Great, we're talking about 332 BC. That means the Greek people would have been in ancient Kemet as mercenaries and as traders and as merchants for hundreds of years before Alexander the Great came and took over that area in his effort to fight the Persians. Stop and think about that for a second. Hundreds of years of influence, hundreds of years of contact, hundreds of years, there were hundreds of years of contact, hundreds of years of influence were taking place before Alexander the Great even came and took over ancient Kemet and made it into basically a Greek colony, if you will. And when I stop and think about it, nobody ever mentions this. Nobody ever talks about this town. And you may have, various opinions, and I'm sure people are going to put different opinions down there in the comments. I don't agree with this, or this may happen. But the truth of the fact of the matter is, we are never told about this. When we talk about Greeks and Greeks' interactions and influence with ancient Kemet, we're not talking about this town, and it's not like nobody knows about it. Everybody reads, people study Herodotus and his histories. They study this. I mean, this has been something that's been studied for years and years and years. And this whole Naucratis thing is not new. It's just new that we haven't talked about it. When we learn about this in school, when we learn about Greece, we should learn about Greeks' presence in ancient Kemet as mercenaries, their presence in ancient Kemet as traders, as merchants for years and years before Greece takes over ancient Kemet, before that, the war that helped kick the Persians out. That we should talk about that, because you begin to understand that a lot of the people that we talk about and we say are Greek, philosophers, even mathematicians, even Pythagoras, even people like that, they're coming to Egypt. They're coming to Kemet before Greece has control of it. They're coming to, because, a lot of times when I was younger and I would see this and I was thinking about, Pythagoras, or I would think about, Herodotus. I think of them coming to ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. Maybe they came when the Greeks were in control and they were just studying things that had been old for a period of time. Well, they were studying things that were old, but they came when Kemet was still Kemet, before Greece had taken over Kemet. So it becomes a significant thing when you think about Herodotus, who is really living at a time when the Persians are controlling a lot of things. He's living at a time when the Persian Empire is very strong. Or you think about Socrates, or you think about Pythagoras, you think about various people who are alive when ancient Kemet is either interacting with the Persians or still developing itself and doing itself as it would typically do, well before Greece takes over. So it's very hard to even say. You can't even make that argument, because I think if you knew that in school, if you knew that a lot of these people came in contact with ancient Egypt and ancient Kemet before Greece was in control of it, it would be hard to say that Greece was the one that started these things. How could Pythagoras or someone like Socrates or someone like Herodotus come to ancient Kemet, right? See the things that they saw. The other people who were traders who came to ancient Kemet from all around, who saw various things, how could they come to this area and before ancient Greece is even in charge, or before ancient Greece is a powerhouse, how could they come learn these things, be credited with these things, and then somehow, turn around and they are somehow, they're the ones who started it? How could that be when they aren't even developed yet? When they're coming in an area that has been around for thousands of years, that was already practicing mathematics, already practicing medicine. And we talk about Hippocrates, and we talk about many other things with respect to, Hippocrates is living around 460 to 370 BC. No disrespect to Hippocrates. He probably was a nice guy and did a lot, in his lifetime, but he's around long after this Naucratis city, long after this establishment of a Greek settlement in ancient Kemet. He comes around after that. So a lot of these people who are interacting with ancient, and we know, and I shared with this in an earlier episode, an earlier discussion, that, the idea of a logical way of looking at treating people who had illnesses and had sicknesses and had different type of problems was already around in ancient Kemet. I mean, they already did things with respect to looking at how to treat people, diagnosing people, coming up with some type of treatment plan, determining what your diagnosis, can they make it, not make it, can we try to fight with it? There's a whole thing with the Edwin Smith papyrus, which was around in the New Kingdom 1,000 years before this. This was already in place. So I wanted to share this because a lot of the list of people that you see here are around before ancient Greece becomes a powerhouse and before ancient Greece takes over ancient Kemet, before they take over and name it Egypt, if you will. These people are all around before then, and there's a settlement. They already have a settlement. They already have a trade. They already have merchants where they're set up, and they're not in control, and they're mercenaries. They're not in control. They're working for and they're working with the ancient Kemetic people, and they're working with a society that's been around for many, many years. So I just wanted to share that, and I'll be interested to hear what your comments down below and what you think about it. Yeah, each civilization is unique, and there you go. And so you have a lot of people. So you have a lot of people who talk about. Thank you so much. So as we talk about this, and there are a lot of people some of who directly travel to ancient Kemet, some of who've got resources from people who travel to ancient Kemet. So there's a lot that's there. So I wanted to share this because I think it becomes significant that the influence is there, and we'll do more on this. We're going to talk more about this as we kind of jump on. I'd love to hear your comments. Please share more down below. I will share more when we get out this. Let's talk more about Naucratis, and let's talk about the area and the interactions and the settlement and the influence that were there with Egypt and ancient Kemet before there was a Greece that was a powerhouse. So I hope you have a good day. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this, and I'll talk to you soon.